Hi there, and welcome to the TechBBQ Life Science Investor Panel. So with me I have Henrijette and Fiona and myself, Søren, and they'll introduce themselves in a minute. But before that, let me just introduce what we'll be talking about. So we will be talking about what to think about when you approach life science investors, what type of organizations we are, what COVID-19 has meant for our organizations and has meant on how we look at opportunities, how we've been coping with it, and how that potentially is going to be impacting our future and thus also your future if you are trying to interact with us. But we will be getting into that. But before we get to there, let me just allow my other panelists here to introduce themselves. So Fiona, why don't you kick off?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Fiona Pathiraja. I'm a managing partner of Christa Galli Vevntures, which is a specialist health tech fund based in London and Copenhagen. We invest across Europe in pan-European startups at seed and Series A. And we have three specific areas of focus: deep tech, digital health, and personalized medicine.
Thank you. And Henrijette?
I'm Henrijette RIchter. I'm managing partner with Sofinnova partners in Paris. We are also a life science fund. We invest from the very beginning into seed, Series A in one of our funds, and then we also span across multiple development stages because we have a crossover fund that invests in later stage companies. We have a specialized fund in Milan that invests in gene and cell therapy, also in the seed and Series A. We have a medtech accelerator also under management, which invests early and is part of maturing the medtech companies before they go into traditional venture financing. And we also have an industrial biotech fund. So 5 funds under management at Sofinnova Partners in Paris.
And my name is Søren Lemonius. I'm managing partner at Sunstone here in Copenhagen. We are at our 4th fund right now. We are a very focused investor in the sense that we only invest in drug development and only in early stage drug development. So I think those short introductions aside, maybe I should also say it's a small panel, but I still think TechBBQ has managed to make it quite a wide panel. If I understand correctly, Fiona, you represent a family office, right? Which sort of is one type of investors. Henrijette, as you can clearly hear, is sort of one of the big European brand name investors that has several offerings on the shelves. They've been around for very long. They've got a lot of experience and basically do stuff themselves if they want to, right? And then Sunstone is sort of a mid-sized, smaller investor. We have to collaborate with others. We can't sort of drive the projects forward themselves. I'm quite sure the 3 very different type of investors, although we share focus on life sciences, sort of have different ways that we interact with the portfolio. So I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how that possibly comes across, also in context of COVID-19. But maybe just spend a minute or two on investment strategy and what you focus on to give our listeners, viewers, a sense of that. And Fiona, why don't you kick off again with what is the investment strategy that you're using?
So we focus, as I mentioned, at seed and Series A. So we put in about £500,000 up to a maximum of that at seed, 3 million at Series A. So not massive tickets, but so sizable. And we focus, as I mentioned, in the 3 specific areas. So deep technologies, digital health, and personalized medicine. We invest across Europe. I'm quite keen in companies that have spun out of universities, so that deep research focused. And we're looking for companies that are very strong locally with the possibility of going global. Because, you know, as with most VCs, we want to hit the big market. So I'm looking for companies that are great in their home nation, but then are looking to go to America, really.
And if you should put a word or two on what you think is special, what is special to a family office, what sort of sets you a little apart from more traditional VCs like maybe Henrijette and myself?
So essentially we've set ourselves up as a single limited partner fund, and that means that we don't have the layers of bureaucracy of lots of different LPs sort of with different sort of, I guess, incentives and alignment. We're able to make decisions quite nimbly, and certainly lots of our startups are saying that our processes are a lot shorter than the bigger funds where, you know, it can take months and months. Yeah. But of course, I'll be interested to hear your points. Obviously not your funds, but that's some feedback that I've had.
No, I would understand that, and that's probably right. That would be our sort of take on it as well, that we probably have a bit more red tape than the family offices do. Yeah. So Henry, do you want to say a few words about your investment strategy?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to mainly focus here on the capital funds, which is the flagship fund at Sofinnova. And we are currently investing out of our 9th fund, which is a 330 million euro fund, where we invest about 1/3 into medtech and 2/3 into drug development. And we specifically focus on seeding companies and driving Series A. So we always take a leading role, and we, as Søren said before, we sometimes go in and seed ourselves, and then we build the syndicate in the Series A. We invest foremost in people, and I'm going to come back to that when we speak about the effect of COVID-19. So we have a lot of repeat entrepreneurs that come back to us with their 2nd and 3rd company that we do with them. Then we invest in breakthrough technologies. So that comes back to a little bit of the investment strategy as well in terms of our equity focus. So one of the reasons why we invest early is because we are focused on getting the right ownership in the companies. And we have this saying that an investment should bring back 100 million euros alone to Sofinnova Capital.
What is the right ownership for Sofinnova?
It's, of course, a very good question. So what we aim for in the seed is around above 25% up to, yeah, we have companies we have 40% of. Right. So, but I think around the 25% is a sweet
what
spot.
So when you as an entrepreneur come to Sofinnova, what would you say, or let's just sort of the big brand name VCs like Sofinnova, like Forbion, like Lifescience Partners, when you go to these type of investors, what do you think is the advantage that you get from sort of hooking in a big brand name investor?
Well, I think there's many advantages for an entrepreneur. First of all, you are going to start working with a fund that can support you for many years. You are tapping into a very, very large network of other investors, repeat entrepreneurs, pharma executives, and so forth. So you will immediately be connected with people that's going to be important for you to build your company. Right. And then when we do investments, we take a lot of responsibility in terms of forming the syndicates. So I think especially for first-time CEO, but even for second and third-time CEO, it's looked much more as a collaboration where we spend a lot of time with the people instead of them having to go and do themselves. Yeah.
So, and I think Sunstone investment strategy, as I said, we are drug development focused only. I mean, obviously also relates a little to the size of organization that we are and the number of people we have involved. We typically have a sort of bite size of up to 10 million euros. And anybody familiar with drug development will know that obviously you don't get a lot of drug development for 10 million euros. So we also need to be a very collaborative fund. Basically, we basically know from the offs that if we cannot collaborate, we cannot exist. And I think that's probably one of the sort of biggest benefit you get from interacting with us is this willingness to collaborate. We know we need to do it. We know we need to reach out across Europe and work with other funds, investors, and expand our network in that way. So I think maybe that's enough about our investment strategy and what makes us, each of us, sort of a little special in this context. So let's become a bit more specific, and maybe starting with you this time, Henrijette. So COVID-19, what has that meant for your organization, for Sofinnova, in terms of how you work? What are you doing different now relative to maybe, yeah, well, it's almost half a year ago by now. It's incredible, right? But yeah. What would you point to?
It is actually half a year ago it all started. So first of all, of course, there's been an organizational challenge, you can say, because with an office in London and Milan and Paris, and we have 15 different nationalities within the office or offices. We only speak English, even though we are a French firm. People very fast dispersed out to where they came from and have been based in those units. So we have been using, like everyone else, WebEx and Teams and also Zoom and what you can come close to in terms of having video calls and conferences. And I think that has been working, and I think COVID-19, if anything positive, it has probably told us that we probably don't need to travel as much as we've done, if you think from an environmental perspective, and also saving just cost for a firm. But then having said that, the limitation is, of course, when you are a fund that invests foremost in people, this part about being with entrepreneurs and meeting with them repeatedly over a diligence period of 6 months is very, very important. And now you have to sort of transform that into a video call. And, we spoke about being fast in terms of diligence. One of the reasons why we spend a lot of time with the entrepreneurs we invest in is because when you have these repeat meetings, you get to know people. And you get a good sense of what's the weak and what's the forces in a team. And that's difficult. You can't meet a team over Zoom. Well, you can see them individually, but you can't really
Do you think you're going to be traveling less as once we get on the other side? You'll be traveling less as an impact.
I think we're all going to be travel less.
Do you think the same thing, Fiona? You'll also be traveling less when we get through all of this?
I think so, because we've been traveling a lot across Europe, and lots of the conferences I invest a lot in radiology deep tech. A lot of that is in the US. So we've been previously traveling to the US a lot. So of course, now that not being able to do that has made me realize actually we can work in different ways quite successfully.
Yeah. No, I think that's true for Sunstone as well. One of the things so you said you've been using Teams a lot, and I think we've all been sort of introduced to, at least on the life science. I'm sure the tech has been doing this for many, many years, but I think we've become more digitalized, if you like. I think it's been interesting at Sunstone to see how that has sort of spread out in also our processes, right? That we've actually moved some of our documentation process into Team, basically because we were beginning to use Team as the main communication tool. So that sort of pulled other things into Teams, which of course is a great benefit for Microsoft. But have you been seeing the same thing, that the fact that you're using a communication tool that much sort of imprints how you also work? Or were your processes so rigid already that has not really happened? Or
instead of rigid, I would call it solid. No, I think, but I think you've simply been forced to use the sharing instruments that you can on all these different providers of communication. And yes, we have done that, but behind that we of course have the systems that we've used for decades.
And how are you? You're I mean, as I understand, you're reasonably new, so probably you have a better opportunity to sort of adapt to this and maybe adapt your processes to this new reality, or how do you think about it?
So we've been in stealth mode for 16 months, essentially investing, but without having a public profile, and now getting ready to launch in September. And as Henrijette was saying, definitely traveling a lot less. I like doing a lot of, because I'm based between London and Copenhagen, I have been doing previously a lot of stuff online, but nothing replaces that real, touch and feel of seeing someone in the flesh. And a lot of early stage investing is based on trust. And I think that is difficult if you've never met someone, face to face, to have that sense of trust when you're sort of investing. So I think that, Zoom is great. We use Zoom, not so much Teams. But it is limiting as well.
Yeah, it is. So, but even if we agree, I mean, we've seen what it can do. Do you think the entrepreneurs should be factoring that in? That probably also in the future, more of how they approach us and talk to us is going to be over these digital meters. Is that something they should think about, or is that not really needed?
I think they should think about it because it's very important. I don't think there's a new normal now, and I don't think we're going to be able to, just go back to the way things were in February, and we have to adapt. Both investors and startups need to adapt, I think. And they need to think about actually how can you manage it in a world with less conferences, less coffee meetings, less warm introductions. I'm actually getting a lot more cold inbound emails, which, much more than we were before. So I'm wondering how that will change the shape of, startups and investments in this sector.
How do you think
I
about
think
it?
it's an interesting question, because over these 6 months, you of course have had these company presentations, which has gone really well. And then you have those where you can see it's completely impossible for a team of 9 members to sit and coordinate over, who's on, who's not on, go on mute, and now the screen is crashing. And that's a big difference from because what we normally do in our process is that we have at least 2 meetings with the full team. And in the first meeting, you ask everyone who's key to come. So that's sometimes a pretty big team. Yeah. And then for the second, which is more sort of a decision-making meeting, you focus in on maybe the 2 C-level people or who's going to be important for that. And we've definitely had some companies coming in to present where when you look at the resumes, they're very experienced and they should be doing very well. Yeah. But it just doesn't work having those 9 people on a call or on WebEx.
No, I agree. I mean, doing a online presentation of your company and your team is a discipline that is different from doing it live.
Oh yes.
And it will rub off on our impression. Hopefully, we have a more complex evaluation than just that, but it does rub off. Yeah, so I can't. Well, if I had thought more about it, maybe I could give advice on what makes the difference. But there's no doubt that there are teams that present really well live, and then there are some that, so I was surprised, they do it really well online, right? And they have a better sense of when to speak and when not to speak, and how to get the message through. So that is definitely something to think about. And then you'll need to go and take a course somewhere on how to do it. I'm not sure I can advise you on how to do it.
Also, I think that board meetings are happening a lot online, which I as a board member, I'm finding quite challenging as well, because the whole structure is different, interactions are different, and so for some of our startups, we're now, because of COVID, having board meetings once a month, which is, is quite challenging, I think, in itself.
Yeah, it is. So if we then look into the portfolio and what has happened in the portfolio, in the companies, and how you've been managing that. So Henrijette, how has this impacted your portfolio, and what have you been doing to try and cope with it?
Yeah, so I think you can divide your portfolio in life science in what we call preclinical and then clinical, because there's a huge difference on the impact. For the clinical stage companies, the ones that are testing compounds in phase 1 and beyond, they have, of course, most of them been put on hold. Yeah. So that's a challenge, because once you get to the clinic, you have your CMO, Chief Medical Officer, on board. You have basically everyone on board who's very high paid. Exactly. And they have probably taken you 1 year to recruit or something. And so you don't really want to change that team to cut down cost again, to make the financing stretch until you can go and begin your clinical trial again. So what we have done there is instead simply putting a hold on new hires. So we've paused a little bit on the build out of the companies. And then some of my companies, or our companies, has been quite creative in looking in other geographies where there was not a shutdown. That's, for example, possible for phase 1.
If you look at the clinical stuff, what would you say is sort of a rule of thumb average delay until now?
6 months.
6 months. Yeah, I would say that's probably the same in our portfolio. Yeah. It's about 6 months.
Yeah, and some of them for 12.
Do you have clinical stage companies that?
Yeah, so for us, it's not necessarily preclinical and clinical. It's pre-regulation and post-regulation. That's how we work in my sector. And I think that essentially there's been a very interesting thing, which is that actually there's been a massive demand for deep tech, and so we have a lot of radiology companies working in deep tech, and suddenly there's huge demand because there's corona everywhere in all sorts of hospitals. We need artificial intelligence solutions to try and diagnose that on CT scans. So we've seen demand skyrocket in some of our companies, which is a whole different challenge, because actually you have to try and figure out how to help them scale and grow in difficult times where supply chains aren't working, etc. That is not something I expected. So
you've actually had companies that have been doing better due to the corona.
Far better.
Which I also think in the tech companies is, they've sort of split the portfolio between really sort of things that have benefited from the COVID-19, but we've not, I mean, I don't know if you've seen that, we don't really have anybody that's benefited from the COVID-19 on the life sciences. No. At the best, they are just sort of hanging in there, but mostly delays. Yeah. But I think that could of course be a potential benefit to some of the medtech companies that they may have benefited from.
Exactly, this. And I think also some of the companies, the idea that actually they're accelerating because there's so many barriers are coming down. In hospitals, doctors before were like, well, we couldn't possibly use a video to see a patient, but now they're much more open to it.
That's of course a very good point, that there are opportunities coming out of this also on the life science side, but possibly more towards the medtech side. So if you look across the portfolio and look at people, companies that has been doing well, apart from the business side of it, more on the management side of it. Are you recognizing traits within your management teams? You talked a little about it earlier. You think this is the characteristics of a manager that has done really well through the COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's clear now to see you have your portfolio of managers with your companies, and I think you can see they sort of separate into creative people and also agile people. And then the ones that are more thinking traditional and have a little bit of a challenge navigating in, as you said, supply chains not working for the preclinicals. It's of course the CROs, the chemistry, the providers of the the drug substance and all of that. It's just down. So you have turnaround times on small molecules which are suddenly 7 weeks instead of 1 week and so forth. And you must see the same in your portfolio. So it creates a massive delay. And you need to basically go back and restructure your financing. In terms of the teams, what we've seen, it's actually spanning from the extreme of we have very experienced CEOs who comes to us and say, I'd be happy not to have my paycheck for 4 months. Or, you know, the three highest paid. We haven't gone to that extreme, but actually they come to us with a straight face and say it. They're completely honest. And then we've had the other extreme, which is sort of managers who seems to be a little bit in a silo and just keep looking at the plan we decided for the Series A and keep going. Right. But every time you have a board meeting, you can sort of see the timelines being extended.
Have you been surprised? I mean, because basically, as we also talked about before we had this panel, we've definitely seen managers that did better than other managers, but I have to say, I don't think I've been surprised. In general, really good managers, at least how we see it, has been really good managers, because our thinking is that the virtue it takes this to basically be managing a venture-funded companies with the ups and downs of that has a big overlap with managing a situation like this. But it could be because you maybe have some bigger companies than we do. I don't know. What about you, Fiona? Are there managers that have surprised you positively in this?
Yes, I think, as Henrijette was saying, the best managers, some of them have really shone in this. You know, they're showing grit, they're showing imagination, you know, they're reaching out. And I think the building of communities is really important to talk about here, because actually some of the most successful leaders in this space, in the startup space, are actually reaching out to each other, creating online communities, sharing. And, you know, some startups pre-COVID have this sort of terrible corporate things of saying, actually, we don't want to share anything, we're very competitive. But now, actually, there's a lot of sharing and collaboration, and people are realizing, you know, you need to grow a pie together for a greater good, rather than just trying to grow a slice for yourself. And
have you been doing, from a fund perspective, anything to facilitate it, to help it?
We've created sort of online communities and getting involved with that, especially in the UK, because especially for diverse, I'm quite keen to increase our investment in diverse founders, because there's a huge lack of underrepresented founders, whether it's females or those from ethnic minorities, etc. And I think we've been trying to help with that, because actually they are less likely to have warm introductions, and now there's even less warm introductions because of the situation. So we've been trying to join online communities to help that kind of founder.
Right. Right. And how about you, Henry? You've been doing something to facilitate it?
We've done the same. So actually very fast. We have about 1/3 of our portfolio in the US, and maybe not a surprise in Boston. I think it took them a couple of weeks, and then they were completely organized. All the CEOs, they had these weekly calls where they helped each other. What CRO is down? You know, can we share this person between us? It was, and what we did there was to connect our less experienced CEOs who didn't have that. We hooked them onto that network, exactly as you're saying. And all of them have said that's been a tremendous help. And I think that's going to go beyond COVID-19. So when we are on the other side of that, I think a lot of those networks that has been created during these months are going to exist and be of help for new people.
Right. And how about your sort of investor to investor networks? How has that been impacted? Your dialogue with other investors? Have you been doing anything there under this COVID-19? Has that changed?
Well, it's interesting. I was just discussing with one of the big US funds last week about that, and in the best periods, I wouldn't say it's been very consistent for 6 months, but there you have basically had weekly half-an-hour update calls with the people you want to work the most with, the people you have worked the most with, or have the best experience with, because then it gets easier to discuss cases that comes in. Because what we're lacking in this time is these informal situation where we have a chat at a conference, and a company comes up, and we have maybe a 10-minute conversation about a company, but then that actually involves that's the starting point for later investment. Yeah. And we don't have those conversations. So instead we have put these weekly or bi-weekly calls in for half an hour where we just chit-chat. And sometimes it's not necessarily about a company, it can be about the organization or something else. But that has been quite helpful.
Yeah, we should be doing that as well. I mean, this is the first time I meet two investors at the same time for a very, very long while. So that's incredible, of course. Well, how about you, other investors? What are you doing to try and network with them?
Essentially keeping a lot of stuff online still going. So, we are meeting, and as Henrijette is saying, keeping in touch with people even if we're not actively investing with them. Yeah. Having said that, we have done 3 Series A rounds in the last 2 months, one in UK, one in France, and one in Spain. Yeah. And sort of, the people who we're meeting there, we are actively speaking with more.
I think that's a very good point, right? I mean, of course, to the entire community, it's important that they understand we're still here, we still have money, we still badly want to deploy them. So I mean, we don't have our brakes on anything. I mean, I don't think any of us does, right? Maybe then getting to sort of the overall sort of TechBBQ theme of resilience and good advice to companies looking for life science funding, how to stay resilient. What is it that we can learn here? What should they think about if they are to stay resilient and get not just to where they are today, but pull through it? Just maybe a word or two from each of you on that, and then we'll try and wrap it up.
So my advice would be, first of all, don't wait until COVID-19 is over. We don't know how long time that's going to take. So if you need to raise money, go and raise your money. Secondly, be even more focused on associating yourself with experienced people, because you are going to need that experience going into the next 12 months, I think. Navigating in troubled waters. And I think thirdly is to be realistic about your timelines and your cost, because I think that things take longer time these days. Yeah. And so don't put yourself in for an early failure on a first milestone because you think you can run a lead optimization or screening in the same amount of time that you could 12 months ago, at least not if you're using CROs. Because again, the turnaround time has increased a lot. So those are my 3 advices, most important.
Fiona?
I would say, reflecting a lot on what Henrijette said as well, the idea that you have to be realistic now, because previously I've noticed that the market is slightly depressed. Valuations are down a little bit, so you have to be realistic about that and about timelines. I would say in health tech that if you're a startup, you should have 18 to 24 months of runway, and if you don't have that, you should try and figure out what you're going to do about it. You have to also think about hard decisions, especially if you're a first-time founder. Hiring people, putting them on furlough in the UK is a difficult thing to do, but you have to do it if you're going to survive. And I also think, from a more positive thing, actually, times of crisis really bring opportunity. And if you think about it, Airbnb was founded in 2008, WhatsApp was founded in 2009, right in the aftermath of this huge financial crisis. So I see no reason why people can't think innovatively and create something great from the pandemic as well.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with both of you. I think it is, of course, important to understand that we cannot expose ourselves the same way we have been doing. So one advice would definitely be to be as outgoing as you possibly can, because our business case is still the same. We still do the same thing. We still have the same money to invest. So you need to come to us with everything you have and can. And I don't think I have much more to add to that. So maybe we should just end on that and basically say thank you to everybody for watching and stay safe.